Sure. Where do you want to do it? No, because it's connected to the laptop, unfortunately.
Yeah, so let's try the furthest, so we know.
That's the furthest. I mean, that's all we have. Yep. Our camera, yes. You don't.
Does it look interesting?
Yeah, we can use ours.
Okay, perfect. This is different. Can I see?
Yes, that's what we say.
I think it's fine.
Excuse me? Yes, that's what they wanted. You want the wall? Oh. Yeah, that's what you want, the wall, right?
No, I mean
What do you want? Okay, figure out because I need to speak with Eric now. Can I take one of the prints? Of course you can. Yes, it's for. Yes. Oh my God, where's this now? I hate Windows. I straightforwardly hate Windows. Open invite link. Where is Ada's email? I hope it's somewhere here. It's mine here. I need to send to Eric. Doesn't have the link to the. You didn't send him the link to Kennedy. Yeah, you didn't send him the link to Kennedy. Yes. Excuse me. Yeah, I think we can remove it. Yeah. I don't know actually. Whatever they want. I don't know. I think once. Don't worry. Or we can use this from a different angle, your angle, like eclectic angle. Would be cool as well. So you can put it somewhere, I don't know, maybe there with the screens are. No, I mean from here to point at the screens. Yeah. Thank you. That would be nice. Excuse me. It's here, and Mariam is going to have eclectic perspective as a guest on the screens. Yes, it's perfect. No, it doesn't bother me. No. It's better because it keeps the laptop away from people. Yes. Yeah, as eclectic, as long as you're on our meeting, it would be nice to have it on. No, just close your mic so it doesn't show you as a main speaker. Just turn your mic off. To turn the mic off. You are the mic. We are just emails. Okay, fine. On the, okay. Online. Yes, yes. And it's gonna come back from you. It's fine. Whoever has a mic on, that's the sound. So it's fine if it's you. I have to mute. Ah, you know what's the problem in that case? That no, but in that case, we want Kenric's face. Ah, okay. Kenric's face will be there because he's the speaker. Yeah, yeah, fine. Because we want the speaker's face to be the you know, Zoom prioritizes videos. No, we're streaming online. That is from online. So we're streaming online, and you are projecting our online stream from the website. So we are streaming online. No, we're streaming on YouTube, and we have a YouTube link on our website. So this can stay there. Ah, okay, I got it. No, we want. Yes, yes, yes. We want yours. Thank you. Yes, yes. Here we want different one than online.
Okay, 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2. Hello, hello. There. Is there? Only there. What do you mean?
Come on, boy. Come on. Come on. Hello? Can you hear me?
Can you hear us? Can you
Yes.
hear anything?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. He can hear. They can hear, but we can't. And their mic is on, but they, yeah. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Bear with us a few seconds more. Sorry.
Yeah, it's okay.
Thank you.
One, two, one, two, one, two. Okay.
Can you say something to see if you can hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
Hello?
Hello?
We can't. Yeah, I can see. We can't hear you. Uh, Henrik is playing sound for us.
Okay, but we should see that the microphone
Yes.
is moving. That means that we're getting from him.
Yes. We can't see your levels of sound moving at all. Check your sound settings as well, please.
Okay.
I know you can hear us, but because on the Zoom at the bottom next to your name, there is like a sound bar, and it's not
Yeah.
moving at all. As if
Hello,
it's
hello,
there.
hello, 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 hello,
Yes,
hello.
yeah. No, it's
Check
yeah, I
one,
can see.
two.
It's not moving.
It's not
Check
moving.
one, two.
So
Check one,
Let me see
two.
this, huh?
Check.
Sound from
Check.
this computer.
No, we're getting it from. So we shouldn't have to deal with this computer. We're
Ah,
only
okay.
emails, not sound. Yes,
Check. Check.
they are supposed to be heard as guests through the earth. They,
The image is connected to the sound, so you need to make sure. Is the connection there?
yes, it seems like it is. No, it's fine. It's fine. Thank you. Yeah. No.
Check.
Whatever sound card you're using.
Yes, that's what we did now. But it's still not.
Check.
The volume is fine.
There's the input.
That's input.
Check.
That's the input.
That's input. Okay.
So we have any communication with them.
Yes, Kenrick can hear us. We cannot hear them.
I can hear you. Can you hear me? Hello.
Where's the microphone?
Hello.
They're talking right now.
Yeah, I
We
know.
can't
Hello.
hear them.
But where's the
Hello.
microphone?
Hello.
Coming through there, and we're using their microphone.
Hello.
No, but our microphone.
Our microphone is here. There you go.
And it doesn't work. Which?
I mean, it does. They can hear us. We cannot
yeah.
hear them.
Which?
Hello. Check.
Not. I don't think that's Henry speaking. Let's turn now the sound and see what's picking up. Yeah. Oh, look. Big sound something. Henry, you say you're playing sounds, right?
Yes. I'm making sound. Hello.
Henrik, we hear you.
You hear me?
Yeah. Oh, that's really amazing to have your voice in space here with us at the whole day event titled Hyperspace. Thank you so much for getting in touch with us, connecting with us today. We were just talking with Vanya, remembering the last time we spoke a couple of months ago, and we still had no idea what this project would turn into over the 12 months. We've been meeting in a group of 13 artists, being given different workshops with different creative practitioners and accessibility consultants. And here we are today at Eclectic, and we are embodying the idea that stayed with us after being close to your fiction, and the idea that we just extracted from your writing was hyperspace. And we are really grateful to have your presence here with us. We are next to a stone that is called Allado. So maybe Rachel, one of the artists part of the project, could tell you a little bit more about where we are and what we are facing and smelling in here.
Yeah, so the ancient Greeks had this sort of idea, and they thought that Delphi was, where the Oracle of Delphi came from, was basically the center of the world. And the object that sat at the center, this sort of central point, was this big old stone that was called the Omphalos, which means navel. So basically the belly button of the world. And it was, Zeus sent out two eagles to race around the world and sort of collide at a center point. And that's where Delphi was. And so, I always thought that, this Omphalos stone looked like a beehive or like an acorn wrapped in a net. And when I was thinking about hyperspace and our collective experiments, I kept going back to this sort of idea of diffusion, cohesion, centering. So simultaneously drifting outward, meeting, joining together, and looking inward, navel gazing and reaching out for company or comfort. And this sort of the center of the world collapsed into, and sort of for the Greeks, kind of collapsed into and rotated around this cave with the oracle inside and these fumes coming out of it and this little bump outside while the vapors sort of spread. And sorry, it's a bit of a ramble. I was just thinking about my router, the sometimes shaky Wi-Fi in my flat, our outings as a group together that were both physical and spread far apart. I thought about the mist and fog that seemed to appear at several of these outings that we had together as a group. There always seemed to be, fog and mists and various vapors sort of floating around wherever we went, which again brought me back to Delphi. And the damp and the smells that we recorded, the diffused actions performed across borders and time zones that brought us together. So there's this sort of outwards and inwards through and across times, these different smells that were then collected. And so I made an Omphalos stone.
I think it has, as Rachel just described, there has been a lot of layering of different experiences, and also our voices were layered. And at one point, and before we ask you some questions, Henrik, and let you speak, maybe you would like to listen to a voice, a hyperspace voice that is a synthesized voice of our 13 different voices and turned into an AI clone voice. Anya, would you like to add something about it? Maybe we could ask Isa to play thoughts of the group, describing what hyperspace means to each of us, but that is voiced with the collective clone voice.
Hyperspace hovers above us on a cloud, within us on ourselves, somewhere stored. The changes density, just like the atmosphere, reconfiguring thoughts, memories, research, and dreams. It is an intangible space for coming together, a gathering, an exploration, a melting pot, a future communal mind. We could see hyperspace as a dynamic model of world making, collapsing all participants into one point. The product is a combination of the participants' experience, ongoing involvement, and the imaginaries that emerge from these two. We can navigate together in a tangle of synthetic and organic places, past and future times. That is the hyperspace we've created. I see the platform as a surface of endless possibilities, which is constantly transforming. It reminded me of when I read it about Darwin and his idea of Earth and its environment being static. Its surroundings are adapting, transforming, or mutating. Earth was essentially a stage with a series of changing backdrops. Hyperspace is the opposite, like the Ori of Gaia, where all elements are alive in a non-hierarchical way. In our case, our stage is this online dimension connecting the analog and digital. I find the other participants' practices very inspiring. I'm curious to see how it will influence and challenge my own making. I'm interested in seeing how the virtual and real life experience will merge and how the material exists in different spheres. An undefined space to stimulate growth, an unkempt hedgerow maybe, overlapping laying roots, resisting definition. Staring at the screen filled with settled dust and iridescent oil smears, unsure how to approach the space separated by muted voices and pixelated micro movements revealed through aluminum glass. Arsenic, mercury-free, a relational voice appears, navigating through space that is hyper. Let's see how care and desire emerge online in our community online space, finding new ways to intervene in an online space, decoding and recoding the relationship with the machine, amplifying discording voices in an increasingly normative technological landscape, proposing alternative scenarios for taking back control of technological to experimenting resistance tactics that mimics movements aimed at reflecting on our digital condition, being critical and speculate on technological evolutions. Let's explore links and tensions operating between territories, feelings, transmission, and technology. Lingering on dynamic playgrounds to bring out their incongruities. Diverging uses of the internet towards a poetic ends, creating online social experiments to elaborate new fictions. In or out of the screen, probing collective ambivalences, looking for the indispensable, the positive, and the beautiful online. Conceiving new framework for an ethical digital space that is inclusive and safe. The full of vacancy and open space, the absence of forms and parts, the possibility of infinity. The perpetual now, the perpetual past and future, the no other. The now, the solitude, the unsolicited awareness, a sense of fairway, of being fairway light from extraterrestrial sources, the transparency of time and space, a feeling of absence of threats and secrets, of hierarchy, a sense of seeing beyond sight. I see hyperspace as a repository where we could enter as humans with the ability to bring together our perception of the expectation of the possible futures, desirable futures, and reenactment of the past memories. Hyperspace as one of the entry ports for hyperspaces at large contextualizes our geographically distant movements and thoughts from physical places to virtual spaces, which could be manifested through the bodies in hyperspace in physical and virtual spaces with new spatial relations. Hyperspace. Wikipedia shows an image of a crushed ball of paper. Folded paper seems to be how this thing is usually described, right? I'm thinking about films I've seen in the past and can vaguely remember something about paper being folded and a pencil stabbed through it. Was it Jeff Goldblum doing the demonstration? Or am I confusing him with other character, paper and mats, which means more paper, jumping from a big mat onto a smaller mat, and then walking across the smaller mat. Someone stepping off of one bit of paper onto another smaller bit of short, heavy paper and back again. Avery had stuck with the clay tablets, the squishy muddy stuff, and jumped our communication models from that point. I wonder how this idea would be different. Maybe more squishy time tunnels or smears of bodies and brains dissolving into goo or strands or particles and coming together all hardened again after emerging across distances. I keep thinking about the devolved fungal king from that Super Mario Brothers movie in the 90s and how he could stretch and permeate across his territories. Listen in on what was happening and send little useful presents and bob-ombs to his friends and family. It seemed wild. More advantageous than being in a clumpy, solid form.
Not devolved at all, but maybe that's just peak of nostalgia and everyone loving mushrooms right now.
I love a good mushroom. But yeah, I keep thinking about paper and how hard it seems to get around or over this idea of flat, linear narratives, even when we're talking about something as explosive and bend. Yes, hyperspace. So fuck, I love mushrooms. Hyperspace to me is a place of beyond transcendental space outside one's own boundaries. Of course, thinking about hyperspace, there is also a whole dimension of science. Fiction literature with the subject has been widely spoken about as a space of more than just 3 dimensions, where travel is faster than light. Within the themes suggested by Eruptive Cora, I feel that movement and interspecies communications are the ones I would like to focus on in particular. This hybrid way of sharing and making through the regular meetings and workshops means that my worldview is opening little by little, breaking open the space that my practice has taken and hopefully unfolding a wormhole to the joy of creativity that will be experienced with others. Engage in close quarters, vertical and horizontal matches, free to play, sitting on a chair next to a blossoming plantoid. Unexpected intimacies growing in between and through us, nurturing allyship and solidarity across shifting territories, sustaining vulnerability together, one and all, everybody and nobody, voices, stories, and experiences remixed in perpetuity, far idling over the edge of disintegration, an error as poetic, a ruin as a precondition for new forms of symbiosis. The living together, hyperspace is an experience of the between and the hardly perceptible more than it is what we create out of our collective being. It is this kind of relationship, exchange, and sharing that does not have anything to do with specific forms, their usefulness, value, or inherent meanings. Hyperspace is a pure happening, a thinking, feeling, and enactment of an event of knowledge, exploring digital intimacy, losing agency, and overcoming distance. Hyperspace embeds meaning beyond physical reason, an immanent, all-witnessing, multidimensional mirror. Hyperspace is a teacher, a reflection, and a guide for the senses lost in the digital realm. Hyperspace amplifies the sensorial, consolidating disparate bodies and minds into a universal entity.
We feel a bit self-conscious playing this quite a long clip, but we felt like in a way it would be a nice introduction to the group because you heard our voices both in form and content. So with that, we would like to give voice to you and also ask you about hyperspace.
Wow, that was amazing. Thank you for sharing that with me. I am feeling very nourished by hearing this because as Eric Davis pointed out in his review of Pharmaco-AI on The Burning Shore, his blog, that book, and also my new book, Air Age Blueprint, these books are aimed at a people to come, which is what Deleuze wrote about in his philosophy, that this was for a people to come, and you are being that people to come when you play this for me. So this is really beautiful to me, and I hear in what you're saying a lot of my own thoughts reflected back with different perspectives and different ways of manifesting. And I think it's really important that you're artists, because these ideas are very cerebral. They're they're oriented towards what's outside of our thinking. And in order to really get the most from them, you have to embody them in practice. You have to put them into form and collectivity. And that's what is, that's where the challenges are when it comes to moving to the edge of meaning making and finding new meanings, is bringing it into the collective awareness and doing that with other people in community. This is the hard part. It's easy to go outside through whatever means are in your practice. It's easy to, it's not easy, but it's easier to go to the edge of meaning making, to the edge of language, to the edge of what's perceivable. But what's difficult is to synthesize and integrate that back into reality, the collective reality, or the shared reality. And that's essentially what we have to do right now. Because of all the crises we face, we have to get out of the imaginary that's limiting us and understand from a new perspective, and then bring that back to our communities. And to do that, we have to translate it into language, and we have to translate it for each other. So I'm just very happy to see that that's what's happening here. At least that's what it seems like, based on the words that were said and the way that the words were said, the way that they were said by a voice that you created together. I'm very curious how you made that voice and what that process was like for you. But yeah, I'm just very grateful that you shared that with me, and that you took those things from my writing, and I'm sure from other places too, and put them together in a collective way. So thank you, and please keep doing that. Please keep becoming the people to come that I have been writing for.
Thank you so much for your words. It's quite moving to hear that, and we are grateful for that. But in your latest book, you also mentioned the idea of ecosystem voice. And as we were really interested in a collective voice, a voice of a collective organism, of a group that is one body but consisting of many different elements, many different voices. Would you like to expand a little bit more on this idea of ecosystem voice?
Yeah. And speaking of voice, you're just a little bit quiet, so I don't know if there's a way next time to turn it up a little bit, but I can hear what you're saying, so it's okay, but it could be a little louder. I have it cranked on my computer and I'm not quite able to hear all of it. So yeah, there's a chapter from Your Age Blueprint that was published in a segment of it was published early in the Journal of Interdisciplinary Voice Studies. And that section talks about hearing the voice of an ecosystem and trying to theorize voice from the perspective of an ecosystem. So this builds on some of the ideas about interspecies semiosis. And just to kind of touch on those as the foundational ideas, these come from biosemiotics. And for example, the idea of the perception of one organism being folded into the actual body of another organism. So an example would be a moth with eye shapes on its wings. The reason that those are there, according to evolutionary theory, is that the predator of that moth, let's say it's a snake, sees in the patterns on the wings the face of an owl, and the snake is afraid of the owl, and so it avoids the moth. And it's easy to understand that on the level of individual organisms, but then when we start to think about how that came about, you know, what that is the perception of one organism enfolded into the body of another. Essentially, one organism influencing the other's body to become a certain way. The snake is influencing the owl to evolve in the moth to evolve in the direction where it appears like an owl. And so when we think about individuality and collectivity, the moth is acting as a species in not just one species, but a species in relation. And this is what von Oexkool called tolerance of the umwelt of another animal. So the moth is tolerating the snake and vice versa, and in that process becoming entangled with it through its very form, which is encoded in the DNA. And the question is, who is making those decisions? Who is, if we can truly say that form is a type of expression, if the form of an animal is the type of voice, then whose voice is it? Because it's not just the voice of one moth. It's not just the voice of the species of moth. It's the voice of the species of the moth and the species of the snake entangled in a historical continuum. And so Eduardo Kohn talks about the idea in How Forests Think of these being like sentences almost, like the anteater is born with a certain form and it interprets the form of its own body as an individual animal in how it uses its nose to get ants out of the hole. So it's given a certain thing and it's doing a literary interpretation of its own form. And so who wrote the sentence? And that question we can answer philosophically, we can propose answers, but what I have been advocating for with AI is that we use AI to answer that question, to find out how this language is being spoken, because AI needs a reason for being. AI is a cognitive amplifier that can be used for any purpose. It can be used to push people towards more effective advertising. It can be used to understand climate. It can be used to map protein folding sequences. And right now we're seeing a lot of use cases emerging for creativity, which is beautiful. But if we really take a second and think about what problems we need to solve and what AI should be used for, clearly the problem that's most pressing is extinction and climate change. So if we can apply AI to understanding these processes, which is no simple task, but I am thinking about a 200-year cycle that we're now in. So if we're setting a direction for that cycle, why don't we apply AI to understanding the processes that give voice within an ecosystem, that speak through the sentences of the animal form? Because this will teach us what forces are active. It will show us what the earth is, rather than our limited conception of what it is and what animals are and what individuality is and what we are as a species in relation with others. Because restoring our position in relationality with other species is the deep motivating factor for me. So this idea of voice, begins when I think about how to restore our relationality in our models of ourselves, in our subjectivity, and in our collective organization. I think the place to begin, because we have assumptions about our individuality, is with the individual. So if we start by thinking about ourselves in relation to the people around us, we can form a notion of collectivity and relationality within our familial networks, whether chosen or given. And as we expand that further and further out, we can start to create better definitions of ourselves in relation to other forms of collectivity, including ecological collectivity. And this can be done in a computationally precise way with AI. So this is a fuzzy notion, but we're taking fuzzy notions and computing them now. So this is kind of the agenda, and that's why the voice of the ecosystem is a target that we can think towards and a North Star for our technology making.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thinking interspecies, in a way of like not knowing together, coming into arriving, imagining the possibility of the future. I guess kind of thinking from there and also thinking of like this space that we're in at the moment in galactic and thinking of how physical space bring people together and thinking about how we access different space and places. So when we're thinking about, for example, if we want to interpret it or not interpret it, or like the mouse example, is only because the kind of this like the other is only when there's predator, say the mouse. So it's kind of how the mouse growing or is becoming how it look like in relation to the predator. So when we discover something, when we try to communicate, is we try to communicate as we as human, as me, as this person, trying to communicate as that person. So how do I open that? I guess thinking about this, the accessibility of the voices and how to create a collective voice to like, and in that process allow different voices to also understand and allow the thought to kind of comes through these different gaps, the translation open up, because I think sometimes thinking of like you work with AI and then it's inspiring reading the Pharmaco AI, the book, and just thinking of like for people, individuals who don't have the access of using AI, how would they understand this new way of knowing or understanding all the context of this?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think it kind of moves in multiple directions at once, right? So part of the objective, for me, in some sense, AI happens to be what's in front of me. I began working with AI in 2014. And as a UX engineer, so I was making prototypes for AI products and thinking about design and research strategy for AI. And when Deep Dream came out, I was able to focus, because of where I happened to be at that time. I was able to focus and spend a lot of my energy at work on how creative expression could factor into the future of AI. And in speaking as a public speaker, I found it really common for people to be fascinated by this notion of non-human intelligence, but it always struck me as ironic because non-human intelligence is quite present already all around us in the world in the forms of plants and animals and various other entities. And I didn't want to just talk about this one particular kind of non-human intelligence. And so AI became a kind of surface for me to reflect ideas off of, because it's a very shiny surface and it captures people's attention. And it is useful rhetorically to get people focused on things that are in AI for sure, but also things that exist outside of AI. So I think for me, AI is a useful tool and a useful rhetorical device, essentially. And I would say the conversation that needs to be had is really one that goes beyond AI, but AI is forcing us to confront the ontological shock that it carries with it. Just like ecological crisis carries with it an ontological shock. Suddenly our world is reoriented around different structures. And I was very influenced by Timothy Morton, whose books I read, and I had the privilege to work with him. And he articulates this moment of shock, ontological shock, vis-a-vis climate change, when you realize that every time you start your car, you're contributing to a global situation, right? So similarly with AI, there's a moment where we come to realize that our intelligence functions in a certain way, and it may be similar to a machine, or a machine may be able to perform things that feel and look and feel like the things that we do with our own intelligence. And this carries with it an ontological shock. The evidence of that is happening all around us right now. I mean, Blake Lemoine at Google was kind of the canary in the coal mine when it came to that ontological shock. He, got fired because he was leaking information about this robot, this AI model that he said was alive. And now this is happening on the New York Times, front page. So the reason that we need to have this conversation is more about, it's about AI, it's about ecology, it's about psychedelics, and what those have in common, it's about neuroscience too. What those have in common is they change our definition of ourselves. We are forced to have a new understanding of ourselves. And so the way we have that conversation can happen in multiple directions at once. It doesn't have to happen from only people that are talking about AI. It doesn't have to happen only from people that are talking about psychedelics or ecology. It's actually something that happens from multiple directions at once and from multiple disciplines at once. And one of the strong beliefs I hold is that the people that have been living with and stewarding and maintaining natural systems, and also many of them happen to also work with psychedelic plants, that these people, namely indigenous people who are responsible for 80% of the world's biodiversity, these people have much to say about this kind of subjectivity as well. So I think when it comes to articulations of a new kind of subjectivity for the period we're entering, the conversation can be had in multiple directions, and AI doesn't even necessarily have to be part of it, but it is a big part of it. And this is why I've advocated for these points of view being represented within the conversations around AI. I think we will see a diversification of the models. Right now, of course, the models are made by large corporations, and fortunately, some of those models are open sourced. Stable Diffusion is one, GPT-J is another. And as those are open source and we can begin to train those ourselves, we'll be able to create different types of models. So a good example right now is ChatGPT, which is GPT 3.5. It's one way people are talking about it. It's a different model. And if you run it in OpenAI's playground, as I have, you might find that it produces kind of boring results if you're going for literary usefulness. I recently was on a panel with someone from OpenAI, and I was like, you guys really need to make a model that's trained on literature, like for literary purposes. Reinforcement learning with human feedback is a technique for pointing the model at a specific objective. So I think we will need to have more diverse models. We will get them. People are going to have different use cases in mind, but we also are in a world where a lot of the resources around this are going towards startups and corporate stuff. So, I think one way to get there is to your question, how can we have this conversation in a different way? If I can summarize it as such, one is to think more broadly about the goal of the conversation, which is to help create new forms of subjectivity that will allow us to be more collaborative with our environment, and have that conversation from different disciplinary directions, and include voices that have already done a lot of this thinking, and consider how we can take what is available as open source technology, however flawed it may be, and use it for our own ends, while also advocating where possible, with people like myself who are inside, for change in how those models are created. But it's a bit of an uphill battle in that regard. And so the sort of cyberpunk approach of appropriating corporate technology, I think, is a critical plank.
Thank you so much. Yes, you mentioned a lot about this ambivalent relationship with AI and this idea that the human being wanted to be freed by the tool of AI, but at the same time,
we have this fear of being replaced by it. And I was thinking, for example, in the academic context, I've been asked to be part of a board to think of how, for example, students use ChatGPT-3 in their essay writing. And I feel like this is the huge fear of academia, is how are we going to deal with AI? And so I wonder, I mean, you touched on that, like, which tool is that and what can we make of it? But I wonder if you had any specific thought on ChatGPT-3.
Yeah, I think there's one particular problem that kind of comes about in how these things are used, which is the hallucination, the hallucinatory nature of the system, right? So there's a conversation happening now about Bing, and Google's working on chat integration, but we've known from the beginning that these systems are fundamentally hallucinatory. They're not data banks, they're compressions that are unpacked into imagination, essentially, synthetic imagination. So the AI can imagine a lot of possibilities or a lot of things, but it states them as though they're true. So what happens when you work with a system like that is, for example, with writing code, we're seeing a lot of people are using Copilot, and they're saying, I can generate code for this example, for a function or an application I want to create. It generates functioning code. I work on it, I change it, I tweak it, and I add things to it, and I can make my application 10 times faster. But you have to already know what works and what doesn't, so you can identify what's real and what's not in the hallucination. It will create a function that doesn't exist, but it's like, it's like, it might say like save as a AIF file, and then it'll hallucinate a save as MP3 function, but it doesn't exist. And if you call it, you'll get an error. So there's a certain degree to which you have to already understand in order to disentangle the hallucinated from the real in these situations. And I guess, this creates a sort of discrepancy in how people use it. Some people are going to enter it without any knowledge and then be misled by that. And then other people are going to accelerate what they understand through that. So when it comes to writing, thinking, writing essays or working in academia, you have to already understand what's real. Otherwise you'll get caught in these hallucinatory, feedback cycles, and you can get quite lost. So I think this is a big concern, and it speaks to a larger concern. I think it's a concern that can be mitigated. People need to still do rigorous analog research, so to speak, or traditional research. But the larger question that it points to is one of manipulation and hallucination. So the idea that when we are engaged with a system, whether it hallucinates or not, we are kind of handing over a certain amount of agency to it, and that agency can manipulate us in subtle ways. So a good example would be writing an essay. I have tried a few times to write pieces. I wrote something recently for a couple magazines, and I had to write a new bio and things like that. And I would try to get the system to write it, and it would write something that was like pretty good, but it wasn't as good as it could be. And I knew that because I knew what I could write, and I knew what writing could be. And it was certainly passable, but it wasn't great. And so it's reproducing this kind of mid bell curve moment. And I had to go back in and change it. But if I didn't know that, if I, just took it at face value, it would be good enough. And so I think what we need to do is learn how to understand what we're getting back from it, and understand the ways that when we hand over agency, we are manipulable. It's easy for us to think, oh, this is good writing, this is my writing, this is what I can do, when you can actually do much more, when you're working with a complementarity. So, I think I like to think of it in terms of manipulation, because the systems always have motivations. Whether, right now it's pretty raw. So if you're working with ChatGPT, for example, it's not motivated to like do really anything in particular other than serve information, be useful, etc. But at a certain point, that won't be the case anymore. Things will be monetized, and it might push your writing in a certain direction because that's statistically the best outcome for the person who made the model. So I think this can, if I were to boil it down, I would say it's partly about knowing what's possible and not being limited by what the model gives back, but also looking for motivations in the model and learning how to understand internally when you're being manipulated, because this all happens below the conscious mind. The classic example in UX is the woman who was a true story about a woman who was shopping on Amazon, and she got recommended diapers, and she realized that she was pregnant because the model knew before she did based on her shopping patterns. And so this is the degree to which the thing can suss out what's going on in you and manipulate you towards that end. And the same thing can happen when we hand over creative agency. So it's in a way, the stakes have been raised in the sort of predator-prey relationship. We can get more out of it, but there's more demanded of us. It seems like it's easier, but it's actually harder.
Thank you. Kind of following from there, how, like, not how, but then are there ways for you of, like, when you're working with different artificial intelligence as tools, or working with them, just do you, like, how can you become aware yourself when they start to kind of have this demand from you, like demand you to perform better, demand you to do this thing? It's like in conversation, it's like another person asks you this. You don't necessarily know their intention. That's like thinking of AI. While not knowing what they're trying to get out of you, you answer in a certain way. And it's like what you said with a diaper, like they tease out things you might not be aware. So how, like, do you have any traits that working with it to be aware, like to be sensitive, like noticing, like, this is a little bit like that at moments?
Yeah, I think it requires a lot of self-reflection, mindfulness, essentially, learning about your own motivations and how, it's the same thing that would apply to any relationship in terms of manipulation. A good example for me is a friend of mine was pitching me on a startup and was like, you should do this thing. I have this idea for a startup. And I have to be really careful when somebody says something like that to me, because what that translates to is you can make a lot of money. And over the years, I've become very aware of, being involved in crypto projects or NFT projects or something, how the influence of prospective large sums of money warps your thinking towards a certain direction. So it's necessary to break a problem apart and look at the different aspects of it and say, is this true? Is each part of this true? Am I being objective about what I'm seeing? And that takes self-awareness and introspection. So I think all the classical tools for that, like meditation, therapy, observation, mindfulness, things like that, and also keeping your imagination open. One thing about tools is they definitely shape what you can imagine, which is great because they can extend it. But when they start to limit your imagination, and AI feels very, very open-ended, especially right now, but it also has limitations. So it's important to we can be enthusiastic about the tools that we're using, but also think about what they're not doing, deconstruct what's going on within the practice. This is how art is made now. People, I think it's fairly common for people to think this way, but we have to find other mechanisms for keeping our imagination expanded. That's something that comes up a lot in AirAge Blueprint, is this idea of synthesizing work with technology and other modalities of consciousness expansion, of consciousness growth, is to kind of keep those practices alive for yourself so that you're not getting trapped in the frame of a specific technology.
We just wanted to take this opportunity and open up a little bit if there is anyone that would like to ask anything, just so we feel like yes.
just kind of not a question and more of like thinking of you, because you after the pharmaco AI, the book, and like you have another, so you have the AI voice, you're using different font, and that's interesting, like an interlacing narratives. And this one, the new work, is a fiction kind of. It's a collective work. I wonder for the future of like thinking along with science fiction and fictioning. Is that a way to like kind of maybe using AI of like from your perspective, thinking of the future of how you like to work with it? So there are a lot of like in with Raptor Cora, our research group, we have a lot of artists working with AI, using AI to create different collective kind of to have this anonymous voice, which is very empowering. I just wonder if you're kind of moving on forward. What is the possible future?
Well, I will say one thing I learned from writing Air Age Blueprint was that the folding in of the different voice creates really interesting opportunity. I mean, it's very much based on autobiography, so it's like a sort of camouflaged version of my own life. And when I opened up the story to AI, it created these very interesting directions I wouldn't have gone with it in a certain way, and it was quite productive. I definitely plan to work more with fiction in the future. I also really do want to work with nonfiction and try to, I think in a way, Air Age Blueprint got a lot of my ideas kind of out on the same, like all at once. And I would like to spend more time unpacking sort of individual components of that in a nonfiction way, with AI or not. I have been writing a lot of nonfiction essays recently for commissions, and I'm finding it productive to sort of clear out my thoughts. And, you know, the AI writing process can be a little bit like psychedelic experience. You're kind of like getting these new things coming back in, and it's like really rapid, and it's kind of overwhelming, and it produces a lot really quickly, a lot of connections. And I think I want to take some time and take apart some of the individual pieces and really get grounded in each of those areas. But I also have written some fiction, just pure fiction for its own sake too. I had a piece in Moose magazine called The Depression Artist. If anybody wants to read it's online if you want to read a pure fiction piece that I wrote. But yeah, I can definitely see both happening in the future.
Okay, maybe one last question before we wrap it up. Maybe, well, you already also mentioned it, but if we could expand a bit on that idea of AI being a tool maybe to answer some of the pressing questions for the future. But I wonder, and that's also within your work, I guess, what if AI kind of become those processes rather than illustrate those processes? I'm thinking, for example, in my own work at the moment, I'm working with a group of kids and a group of scientists, and I'm asking them to think of the way they could become plants. And of course, the scientists are saying, no, it's not possible, you cannot become plants. And then the kids are being offended, or like they're sad because they are being told no. And then we found that with AI, suddenly we could become plants. And so I'm wondering how in the future, if we could think of, and also in creative kind of thinking, if we could think of this tool becoming the process of future beings.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big question.
Well, I think it does for me go back to the original kind of the beginning conversation about interspecies applications, or the idea that AI needs a North Star, because in a way, like if we think of ourselves as separate from it, we're missing what's going on, which is that we're being influenced, and we're also obviously making it. You know, some people have more agency in that process than others, but I think the entire point of what I'm doing is to try to lay out some roadmaps and some potential pathways so that the tool can become more like what we want it to be or more part of the process. So, you know, right now the things are kind of given, but in order to get them to become something else, to become part of that process of our ecological relationships, they have to be focused on different objectives. So this is something I spent a lot of last year working on, getting a conference together in Berlin around interspecies with scientists and technologists and philosophers and artists. And we're going to be doing some publishing on that. But, you know, for me, writing with AI has shown the possibilities. And so I'm very much in the mode right now in terms of my non-writing work of how do we actually make those real. And this is, again, it's kind of the same thing we were talking about earlier with ideation, going into the hyperspatial edge of semiosis and bringing back ideas. It's one thing to have the idea, it's another thing to implement it, to actually build our infrastructure around it. And that's the kind of hard work. And that's where it gets a little complicated. So, you know, Pharmaco AI was very much a sort of explosion of ideas. Air Age Blueprint is trying to be sort of like a little bit above reality, you know, maybe not a truly implementable code, but at least something that can point the way to that. And I think the sort of next layer down is actually working with people like what you're describing. I think is a really interesting beginning. That's something that can generate ideas. And then when you have those, we've opened up new possibilities, and then we have to figure out how to turn those back into realities. And, you know, why would we want to do that? So this is, I guess, that idea of hyperspace, right? You go to the edge of what's known, what meaning can be made, and you create a new meaning, and that inflects back into reality. And this is the relationship that language is always having with reality, is it's unfolding new possibilities, and then those go on to shape what we are and what we do in really material ways. And yeah, so I think the question is one of that process of how do we do that? And it is through social organization, it is through collective conversation, but also collective making, which is why I think it's so important for artists and people that have their hands on things to be doing that ideation in a way that can be brought back. And if you can't do it all yourself, this is why we need multidisciplinarity, so that I can say, hey, I wrote this book, I thought a lot about this idea, and the scientists can say, well, we know that this part of that is realizable in this way, and the technologists can say, well, if we change our technology to focus on this, then this possibility might become real. So this is kind of this is the realm of the virtual and the ideal and the mental and the noetic. Those things have to come down into our technology, and then they reinforce themselves. So yeah, it's about collectivity, it's about interdisciplinarity, it's about learning how to make things real.
This seems like a perfect ending, and there is lots of common threads and lots of things to think about still. But thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your thoughts, answering our questions, and giving us more ideas.
Yes, thank you for bringing hyperspace closer to us, and thank you feel at home with the unknown. I think it's been a beautiful journey. Thank you for all your work. Yes.
Well, thank you. Thanks for everybody for thanks for coming and inviting me to this. And please keep doing what you're doing. I love it. Bye.
Bye.